Welcome to Tragedy, Triumph, and True Crime Tales. This channel is for people like me, people who sleep better with a murder mystery than a meditation. Tonight's story takes us to remote Scottish Isles located amid stormy seas. Let's get into it. Boxing Day, 1900. The Lighthouse tender. Hesperus has been trying to reach the island for nearly a week. Storms have kept it in port. Now, finally, the weather has broken enough to sail, and Joseph Moore stands at the bow as the ship rounds the cliffs of Eilean Moor, one of the Flannan Isles, 20 miles off the northwest coast of Scotland, in the North Atlantic. Something is wrong before they even drop anchor. No flag on the flagpole. The supply boxes that should have been left at the landing stage for collection. Not there. No one at the jetty. No figure on the cliff top. The ship sounds its horn. Nothing. Captain Harvey fires a rocket. The sound rolls across the island and the water and comes back as silence. Moore rows ashore alone. He climbs 160 steps cut into the rock, up to the lighthouse compound. The gate is closed but not locked. The main door is closed. He pushes it open and steps inside. The kitchen is in order. A chair is pulled out from the table, as if someone stood up recently. The lamp has been cleaned and refilled, ready to be lit for the evening. The clock on the wall has stopped, and there is no one here. He searches the lighthouse from bottom to top. He searches the island. He finds nothing, no sign of struggle, no note, no explanation of any kind. 3 men who had been on this island since the 1st of December simply are not here anymore. That evening, Captain Harvey sends a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board in Edinburgh. A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the occasional have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but, as no response was made, managed to land Moore, who went up to the station, but found no keepers there. 3 men, gone, no bodies, no distress signal, no witness, no explanation that has ever fully satisfied anyone who has looked at this case. This is the story of what happened on Eilean Moor in December 1900. And it is also the story of what didn't happen, because almost everything you have heard about this case before is wrong. Chapter 1: The Island and the Men. To understand what happened, you first have to understand where it happened, because Eilean Moor is not a place most people can easily imagine. The Flannan Isles are a small group of uninhabited rocky outcrops in the Outer Hebrides, the island chain that runs down the northwest coast of Scotland like a scattered spine of stone. Eilean Moor is the largest of them, and even it is barely half a mile across. There are no trees, no shelter except what the lighthouse compound itself provides. The island faces the full, unobstructed force of the North Atlantic, one of the most violent stretches of ocean on Earth, a place where storms build across thousands of miles of open water before breaking on the rock with everything they have gathered. The lighthouse had been operational for exactly 1 year. First, lit on December 7th, 1899, it had been built to warn ships away from the islands, which had claimed vessels for centuries. Getting materials to the site during construction had required hauling everything up 45-meter cliffs directly from supply boats, a task of extraordinary difficulty. The Lighthouse Board had built 2 landing stages, one on the east side of the island and one on the west, connected to the lighthouse by a cable-hauled railway running up the steep gradient of the rock. 3 men were stationed on Island Moor at any one time, rotating with a fourth keeper who spent his weeks ashore. They lived in close quarters, in a world bounded by rock and water and light, and the maintenance routines that kept the lamp burning through every night. In December 1900, the 3 men on the island were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald McArthur. James Ducat was the principal keeper. He was 43 years old and had spent 20 years in lighthouse service, a career built on reliability, on the kind of steady competence that the Northern Lighthouse Board depended upon for its most remote postings. He was a family man. His wife was waiting for him ashore. His 4 children, Louisa, 16, Robert, 13, Annabella, 9, and Arthur, the youngest, just 6, were waiting too. James Ducat was not a man who took risks. 20 years of lighthouse work teaches you very specifically what the sea can do, and it teaches you to respect it. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant. He was younger than Ducat, less experienced, and he carried with him the specific anxiety of a man who had once been fined 5 shillings for losing equipment in a storm. 5 shillings was real money to a lighthouse keeper in 1900, perhaps a week's worth of small expenses. He had not forgotten it. He would not have wanted to lose equipment again. Donald McArthur was not the regular first assistant. He was filling in for William Ross, who was on sick leave ashore. MacArthur was described in some accounts as having a volatile temperament, a man with a short fuse. We note this because it becomes one of the theories about what happened. What we know for certain is simpler. He was a lighthouse keeper doing his duty on a remote island in winter, and when the others went out and didn't come back, he left the lighthouse without his oilskin coat. That last detail, the oilskin left behind, is the most human and most haunting fact in this entire case. We will come back to it. Chapter 2: The Last Days. The routine of a lighthouse posting in 1900 was built around the logbook. Every keeper recorded weather conditions, barometer and thermometer readings, the state of the wind, the time the lamp was lit and extinguished. The log was the official record of the station's operation, and it was kept with the care of men who understood that ship's captains and the lighthouse board depended on what they wrote. The last completed entries in the Flannan Isles log are for December 13th, 1900. For December 14th and the morning of December 15th, the readings had been noted on a slate, ready to be transferred to the log later. Barometer readings, thermometer readings, wind state at 9 in the morning on the 15th. The lamp had been extinguished at the correct time. The work of the morning had been done. What this tells us is precise. The 3 men were alive and working normally on the morning of Saturday, December 15th, 1900. Whatever happened to them happened that afternoon. Now, before we go any further, there is something important to address. Because if you have ever heard this story before, and many people have, you have almost certainly heard details that are not in any official record. Details about desperate logbook entries, about Marshall writing that the storm was the worst he had seen in 20 years, about Ducat being unusually quiet, about MacArthur weeping and praying, about a final entry that reads, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. These entries do not exist. They never existed. They were invented. In 1929, nearly 30 years after the disappearance, a writer produced a sensationalized account of the mystery for a pulp publication and added these dramatic details to make the story more compelling. They spread. They were repeated. They were reported as fact. Within a generation, most people who knew the story knew the invented version rather than the true one. Similarly, the famous image of an overturned chair and a half-eaten meal on the table, suggesting the men were interrupted in the middle of supper, comes not from any investigator's report, but from a poem, a ballad called Flannan Isle, written by the poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson in 1912, 12 years after the disappearance. Gibson took the bare facts of the case and added atmosphere. He was a poet. That was his job. The problem is that his additions were so vivid and so widely read that they became the story. The official investigation found no overturned chair. The kitchen was in order. There was no uneaten meal. Joseph Moore, the man who actually walked into that lighthouse on Boxing Day 1900, described a room that was simply empty. Not disturbed, not dramatic, just absent of the people who should have been in it. We tell you this not to deflate the story, but because the truth is actually more unsettling than the myth. The invented version gives the imagination something to grip, a moment of sudden interruption, a visible before and after. The real version gives you nothing. 3 professional men doing their jobs carefully on an ordinary morning, and then gone. No moment, no drama, just absence. On the night of the 15th of December 1900, the steamer Archtour was making her way from Philadelphia to the port of Leith in Edinburgh. She passed the Flannan Isles at around midnight. Her crew noted in the ship's log that the lighthouse light was not showing. The captain intended to report it on arrival, but the Archtour ran aground in the Firth of Forth on her approach to Leith. In the confusion of that incident, the report about the Flannan light was delayed. The Northern Lighthouse Board did not receive word that the light was dark until 11 days after the men had disappeared. 11 days during which 3 bodies lay somewhere in the North Atlantic, unlooked for, while the light that was supposed to warn ships away from the rocks stayed dark. Chapter 3. The Investigation. The relief tender Hesperus had been scheduled to reach Island Moor on the 20th of December. Storms prevented it. Captain Harvey finally made the crossing on the 26th of December and left Joseph Moore with 3 volunteer sailors to tend the light while he returned to Lewis and sent his telegram. On December 29th, Robert Muirhead arrived on the island to conduct the official investigation. Muirhead was the Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent for the district. He had personally recruited all 3 of the missing men. He knew who they were. He had read their service records and understood their characters. He came to Island Moor not just as an official, but as someone who had a stake in understanding what had happened to men he had sent to this place. He examined the lighthouse first. Everything was in order, as Moore had found it. The lamp was clean and ready. The log was current to the 13th. The clothing in the keeper's quarters told him something. 2 sets of oilskins were gone. 1 remained hanging in the hallway. Muirhead concluded that one belonged to MacArthur, that the other 2 men had gone out dressed for weather, and MacArthur had followed without stopping to put his on. Then Muirhead went to the landing stages. The east landing was undisturbed, normal, nothing out of place. The west landing was a different matter entirely. A storage box secured at 33 meters above sea level, more than 100 feet above the waterline, had been broken open. Its contents were strewn across the rock. Iron railings along the pathway had been bent over. The iron railway track, set into concrete, had been wrenched from its foundations, and a single rock, which Muirhead estimated weighed more than a ton, had been moved from its position. This was not ordinary storm damage. The force required to do what had been done to that landing, to displace a ton of rock, to wrench iron from concrete at a height of over 30 meters above the sea, was extraordinary. It pointed to something that in 1900 had no accepted scientific name, because most maritime scientists of the era did not believe it existed. A rogue wave. Rogue waves, also called freak waves or monster waves, are waves that appear suddenly and dramatically exceed the expected height for the conditions around them. A sea with waves averaging 5 meters might produce a rogue wave of 15 or 20 meters with almost no warning. They do not behave like ordinary storm waves. They come from unexpected directions. They strike isolated points. And for most of the 19th and early 20th centuries, when sailors reported them, they were largely dismissed. The sea did not produce waves of that size outside of extreme storms, scientists said. The sailors who claimed otherwise were exaggerating. It was not until 1995 that instruments on a North Sea oil platform measured a wave of 26 meters, more than twice the expected maximum for the conditions that day. After that, the scientific community accepted what sailors had known for centuries. Rogue waves are real, and the North Atlantic west of Scotland is among the most prone stretches of ocean on Earth for producing them. Muirhead's reconstruction of what happened was this. Ducat and Marshall had gone to the West Landing, most likely to check on the equipment and the supply box that the recent storms had damaged. Marshall, in particular, had reason to be anxious about losing equipment. He had been fined before. He would have wanted to secure everything before the next blow came. A rogue wave struck the West Landing while the two men were there. At 33 meters above sea level, in conditions where such a wave was not expected, there would have been no warning and no time to run. The wave took them. MacArthur in the Lighthouse waited as long as protocol and anxiety would allow. Then he went out to find them. He went without his oilskin, perhaps because he thought he would only be a moment, or perhaps because he was frightened and not thinking clearly. He did not come back. No bodies were ever recovered. The North Atlantic does not give back what it takes. Chapter 4: The Myth and What It Cost. The official verdict was accidental drowning. Muirhead's report was thorough, his conclusion reasonable, and for the Northern Lighthouse Board the case was effectively closed. 3 keepers lost in a storm at a remote station. Terrible, but not inexplicable. But the public did not let it go. There was something about this case. The completeness of the disappearance, the absence of any body, the remote and atmospheric location, the impossibility of knowing exactly what had happened in those final minutes, that the imagination could not leave alone. Newspapers speculated. Locals on Lewis spoke of the old stories about the Flannan Isles, which had been considered cursed or sacred, long before any lighthouse stood there. A phantom ship, a sea serpent, foreign spies, men who had arranged to escape their lives and start over somewhere new. And then, in 1912, Wilfred Wilson Gibson published his poem, and in 1929, the invented logbook entries appeared in print, and gradually, the true account, three experienced men caught by a freak wave on a winter afternoon while doing their jobs, was buried under a more satisfying story, a story with drama, with atmosphere, with the suggestion of something beyond ordinary explanation. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because the myth version of this story is everywhere, in books, in documentaries, in every online article about the Flannan Isles mystery. The true version is much harder to find, and that disparity tells us something about what we want from stories of unexplained death. We want it to mean something. We want the strangeness to be in the event itself, not just in our ignorance of its details. An ordinary accident, even a violent and terrible one, feels like an insufficient explanation for the grief of four children waiting for a father who does not come home. So we reach for something else. We reach for the overturned chair, for the uneaten meal, for the final log entry about God and the calm sea. We reach for a story that feels as large as the loss. The Northern Lighthouse Board's Register of Keepers carries a note beside James Ducat's name, written in red ink. Disappeared on or about December 15th, 1900. The same note beside Thomas Marshall's name. All three men are recorded in the Register of Deaths for the District of Carloway. Cause of death listed as probably drowning. Probably. Even the official record holds the uncertainty. Even the men who investigated it and concluded what most likely happened could not write it as fact. They could only write probably, which is, in its way, the most honest thing in this entire case. James Ducat's wife received no body to bury. His children, Louisa, Robert, Annabella, and Arthur, 6 years old, grew up without him. Thomas Marshall's father and brother and sister had no grave to visit. Donald McArthur's wife and children received only the official notification and the pension that followed it. These families lived with a specific kind of grief that has no resolution, the grief of not knowing, of knowing that somewhere in the North Atlantic, below waves that gave back nothing, was a person they had loved. The sea holds its dead in a way that the land does not, and the families of lighthouse keepers understood that as a condition of the work. But understanding it in the abstract is not the same as living it. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse continued operating after December 1900. New keepers were posted. The light was kept burning. In 1971, the lighthouse was automated, and the last human keepers left Island Moor for good. No lighthouse keeper has lived on that island since. The lamp operates now without anyone to tend it. Sensors and timers doing the work that Ducat and Marshall and MacArthur used to do by hand. But the light still turns. On clear nights from the right point on the Isle of Lewis, 16 miles to the east, you can see it. A slow pulse over the dark water, regular as breathing, marking the same rocks it has marked since 1899. Exactly as they kept it, on all the nights they were there. We will never know exactly what happened in those last minutes on the West Landing. We will never know which man went first, or whether any of them saw it coming, or what the last thing was that any of them thought. The North Atlantic has kept that secret for 125 years, and it will keep it forever. What we know is that they were there, that they did their work carefully and well on a remote island that most people had never heard of, keeping a light burning for ships they would never see. That they were James Ducat and Thomas Marshall and Donald McArthur, and they had people who loved them, and they did not come home. Sometimes that is all a story gives you, not an answer, just the names and the light and the sea,